Is Ole Miss a potential landing spot for Princely Umanmielen? And what exactly does that look like? This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, and I'm likely the only person that you're going to hear from today that has had an office in the Manning Center at Ole Miss and has worked in the national media at Yahoo Sports. I also did a little local stint in Nashville at WSMV, but thank you very much for joining us. Today on the show, we talk about whether we think Ole Miss is a legit landing spot for Princely Umanmielen. They're the top pass rusher potentially in the portal. It's a very interesting thing. We'll break that down. As I mentioned, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all podcast apps and YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers to make the show what it is. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use the code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit matchup to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Now, everybody needs to learn how to pronounce the name potentially. Princely Umanmielen, the pass rusher Jack. He is a Jack pass rushing specialist from Florida. He had 7 sacks on the year. And why are we talking about that name? Well, I'll just go ahead and bring this up. Yesterday, there was Lane Kiffin put out the tweet from Moneyball of him doing that. You know, him doing the fist pump thing. And everybody assumed that was about Walter Nolen. That is the story, that happened as soon as Walter Nolen was about to get into the portal. Everybody thought that was about him, and may have been. But it is at least interesting. The Umanmielen liked that tweet, and it's still up on his profile. If you want to go to his Twitter profile, it's probably still there, which tells me that either he's trying to get Lane's attention, or that's actually the person that the tweet was about. There was a conversation that just was had, and that is the person that the Moneyball tweet was actually about. Really interesting stuff. Umanmielen had 22 stops, 7 sacks last year. I think Brandon Olson from Locked On Gators described him as a potential top 50 player in the NFL draft. He's 6'5", 255 pounds from Manor, Texas. His grades are in the high 70s, low 80s, according to PFF. You know how I feel about the PFF rankings, but you have to put them up. People they want that information. But he's worn number 1 at Florida, and he's the defensive end. He's a starter that they desperately wanted to keep. Florida changed, I think, their defensive line coach, but their edge rushers coach is still there. So it's not a coaching change type situation. Brandon Olson said on his show that he assumed that this was basically just Princely trying to get better, trying to win at a really high level. Remember what we talked about yesterday about how Ole Miss is able to recruit to the playoff, and that kind of puts them in a different stratosphere than they had been previously. This might be an example of exactly that. I mean, it's 24 hours, but it could be exactly that example, to where Ole Miss is getting the interest of Princely Umanmielen. Sorry, I'm going to butcher that last name pretty consistently. But we'll just call him Princely for now on. This is an example of that happening for him, and Ole Miss being a beneficiary of being able to recruit to the college football playoff. This isn't a cash grab, from what I understand. This isn't anything like that, because if it was a cash grab, he could have just went to the league. This is a situation where the kid wants to get better and be the best version they can be developed as a defensive end to get ready for the really big payday potentially in a year. And Pete Golding kind of fits that bill. This is one of the current masters in college football of defenses that utilize that jack position. So you know you're going to get developed. He knows how the defense a little bit works. The terminology might change. It might be a little bit different in the way that it's actually called, but the usage is going to be pretty similar. He knows what he's going to walk in that situation. Ole Miss is still unknown about Cedric Johnson and Jared Ivey and Isaac Ukwu and all of those guys. Where Ole Miss is going to sit in the pass rushing thing, and to get one of the biggest and best pass rushers in the transfer portal potentially is a major, major deal. This cannot be overstated how big of a deal this is. And when you look at the players that Ole Miss is recruiting, and we're going to talk about that next segment, Ole Miss is big game hunting in the transfer portal this year in a way differently than they have in the past. Not having to bank that money of NIL on a quarterback and the ability to go out, you can go after these big fishes because you are not in the super like quarterback dependent thing. Because you're not trying to having to get a quarterback, you can get in the Walter Nolen sweepstakes, the Princely sweepstakes. Chris Paul, potentially one of the best linebackers in the portal. There are some very big names, very talented players that are currently in the portal. We'll talk about that in the next segment. But, this was a situation to where I live, okay? And the people that I've known from like my 10 years at Yahoo Sports, and, I built up a little bit of a network of people. I don't try to break news or anything like that, but occasionally some things find me. And I was sitting here and I got my phone started blowing up, and it's like, hey, look at this. And then they sent me that screen grab, and then I reached out to some Florida people, and they kind of confirmed what I was been hearing. There's like, hey, there's some fire to this smoke. You probably need to get on this fairly early, and that's what I'm going to do. Now, this is the transfer portal. Everything that happens, there needs to be this caveat. What is news for 48, 72 hours may not be relevant the next 48 to 72. And getting the kid committed and getting the kid on campus is going to be an important deal. It looks like, and everything is trending that way, that Ole Miss will potentially get him on campus. That's the first step. From there, you try to close the deal and make it done. If not, the kid goes and visits another school, and you kind of reset a little bit everything. So that's just the way this transfer portal works. But right now, it looks really good for Ole Miss potentially having interest from one of the top pass rushers in the country, one of the largest and best defensive linemen, and probably best transfer portal player ever, the best linebacker in the portal, in my opinion. And they're doing all kinds of work in the secondary. This defense has a chance to get really good, and the defense was really good this year. I mean, that is the crazy part of what is going on. But we'll try and say it again. Princely Umanmielen seems to be interested in Ole Miss. The interest seems to be reciprocated, and we'll see exactly how that goes. Best pass rusher nationally in college football that's available in the portal, in my opinion. He is really good. He had 7 sacks from the jack position, real similar to the position that Cedric Johnson played this season as well. Thanks again for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day. We're just getting started. Ole Miss is obviously big game hunting, and we tell you why coming up in this next segment. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. Hey, cool acronym, right? It's just you versus the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including sharks and pros, you just pick more or less than 2 to 6 players and stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. With the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 to more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo. You pick more or less in that combo of 3-point field goals made and receptions. That's pretty cool. But if you want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, you can now find the community plays under the promo tab of the app to view their entries and some of the entries of some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. So go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, so we talked about Princely Umanmielen. Like I said, I'm going to butcher that name probably pretty consistently moving forward. I do apologize to the kid for that. And I honestly think that if his name wasn't so hard to pronounce and it wasn't so intimidating, he'd probably be more highly thought of and more talked about than he actually is. But he's a really, really good player. Now, we're in a situation that Ole Miss is kind of big game hunting at the moment. Let me put this up real quick. This is kind of the direction that Ole Miss is in. You have Princely Umanmielen, I think, Umanmielen, plans to enter the transfer portal from Florida. We talked about that in the first segment. Carter Smith is slated to visit. He is one of the top offensive tackles in the portal. You have Chris Paul, which I think is the best linebacker in the portal. And then you have Warren Nolen, who might be the best player in the history of the portal. Two players Ole Miss is trying to get visits and get into the game with. It looks like they might be. Jerry Hamilton from 247 says that Oregon and Ole Miss are probably the two favorites for Nolen. Texas is trying to get him on campus. Everybody is going to recruit this kid. Everybody is going to do that. Princely Umanmielen, you have a situation with him. Ole Miss is going to try and get him on campus. He's one of the best pass rushers in the country, period. Potentially a top 50 type player. Like I said, one of the top offensive linemen, top linebackers. They're big game hunting right now. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that, A, their NIL collective is healthy. It is. It's potentially, it's probably 8 figures. We'll just say that right now. It's probably 8 figures at the moment. I don't know where it sits in that 8-figure range, but it's probably 8 figures at this point. And that is because of what happens last January. I think it hit 12 or something like that. So you have to assume that that number has only gone up in the course of the year, especially with some of the bumps like the LSU game and the Peach Bowl game and the Chris Beard stuff. There's been a lot of investment into that portal or into that collective. And Ole Miss not having to take a quarterback, which is the money suck of all money sucks right now this year. It's probably $1 million to $2 million for a quarterback that is SEC level. That's the waters you have to swim in. So if Ole Miss had a normal collective to where it goes, that we're talking that could take like a quarter of the budget for that year to get a top shelf SEC level quarterback. Ole Miss not having to swim in those waters means they can reallocate that money honestly to Walter Nolen and Princely Umanmielen and Chris Paul and potentially Key Lawrence, and there's several players that have popped up. Carter Smith visiting. So Ole Miss gets to swim in these waters because, in a lot of ways, because they don't need the quarterback, because they did that last year. We all kind of like to make fun of Lane Kiffin for all the quarterbacks they got a year ago. Well, because of that, Ole Miss is in completely fine shape and can use the collective to retain, which is always going to be an important part, and also go after big game type players at positions other than the super high caliber, high paid positions of quarterback. Really, really good football players. I mean, there's stuff out there that Ole Miss is going after a wide receiver. I think the Lacey kid at South Alabama, they're doing that. I think Juice Wells is getting a talk to, and just the wide receiver positions. DeCorey Macklin, you heard that name early on. So it should be interesting. This portal month should be fun because Ole Miss knows what they have. And you've heard me the last couple of days talking about this. And I'm going to harp on it. I'm just am. I'm going to harp on this. And this is the first year that Ole Miss gets to recruit to playoffs. You look at what Princely this is doing. And the rumor is that he just wants to develop his craft, here Pete Golding, and he wants to win. Ole Miss is in the playoff conversation right now. And getting Princely would not hurt that one iota. Getting Carter Smith, that helps it out. Chris Paul, that helps it out. Walter Nolen, that helps it out. What Ole Miss is doing this month will be the difference between them being in the conversation to get into the college football playoff of 12 teams in 2024 and Ole Miss hosting a playoff game in 2024. I don't think that no matter what, I don't know if Ole Miss is going to be like in the conversation for a bye because you have to win the SEC to get a bye. If you get an at-large, at best you're fifth. You have to win your conference to get a bye, which means you have to outdo Georgia. You have to outdo Alabama. LSU, you have to figure they're going to wake up. Tennessee, you think they're going to be back. I mean, we waited 20 years and then they thought they were back and then they kind of weren't back, but you all get it. And you have a situation to where Ole Miss is in the thick of that conversation. In the last 3 years, Ole Miss has the third most wins in the Southeastern Conference. And they have positioned themselves to be right on the cusp. In a lot of ways, they're real similar to Penn State. Penn State has had trouble getting over the Michigan and Ohio State hump. Ole Miss is having trouble now getting over the Georgia and Alabama hump. That happens. That's a part of the process. And that is, I mean, it's going to be really cool. But if you look at the players that Ole Miss is just in the game for, if you look at the players that Ole Miss is potentially landing, you're talking about not just Ole Miss getting to a playoff, but Ole Miss being better than their team this year. And this year's team, they finished 11th in the college football playoff. They would have been in the playoff. They would have had a road game to the Horseshoe, and everybody in the Ole Miss fan base would have been losing their mind. These type players are actually a way that you get a little bit better. And Lane Kiffin has done a fantastic job of making the roster incrementally better every single season. And now we're at the point where Ole Miss is swimming in these waters. And that just blows me away. When you look at the players that Ole Miss is shooting their shot with right now, and like I said, they're not going to get them all. But if they get some of them, that's kind of the goal. But there's a big difference between getting really good G5 players, which I'm an advocate of. You can go back to listen to some of my shows that I'm an advocate of that. If you can find a John Saunders, go get a John Saunders. If you can find a Trey Harris, go get a Trey Harris. But this year, they're starters on Power 5 SEC level teams, Big 12 level teams that Ole Miss is in the game for at the beginning. Like I said, Ole Miss may not get them all. Heck, Ole Miss might not get any. But the fact that Ole Miss is in this conversation is something that they should probably be pretty proud of, honestly. Still more to come on Locked On Ole Miss, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Penn State's dominant defense is getting less dominant by the day. We'll tell you what we mean next. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over $122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Exclusions apply, eligible items only. eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day, and shout out to the everydayers. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Be part of history. All right, so Penn State has had an explosive elite defense, and we did a show last week talking about, I might have been this week, about all the players and all the things that Ole Miss needs to look at coming into this game. And we talked about Manny Diaz, and we talked about Chop Robinson and a couple other players on the front. Penn State had 3 first-team all Big Ten players. Manny Diaz plays an explosive, exciting, attacking defense that forces offense to adjust to what they're doing. Everybody remembers when Manny Diaz was at Mississippi State, and everybody knows how that you beat a Manny Diaz defense when he was at Mississippi State. That said, I think it was Wednesday of the week, Chop Robinson opted out of the bowl game. He is the absolute number one total best prospect on the board for Penn State. He's a fantastic pass rusher. He was going to be a problem on the edge. He just was. There's no way to really get around that. We know what the offense does from time to time. He was going to be a little bit of a problem. As we described, he was the guy that offensive lines slid the lines to. He is the player that got the attention on the defensive line, making other players a little bit more explosive, and the defense as a whole, because they have good players, more explosive. Manny Diaz had that unit, that triangle of death, in the middle of the field and near the line of scrimmage, along with a NFL-level cornerback. And Manny Diaz put them in position through being aggressive, and they were pretty good. But Manny Diaz right now, let's bring this up. Manny Diaz is currently the top candidate for the Duke head coaching search, and a decision is expected in the next 24 hours. That is from Pete Thamel. Everybody assumes that Manny Diaz is going to get that job. This is kind of a big deal, everybody. Manny Diaz is good. Now, you're still going to deal with talented players on that side of the roster. They've recruited well. But if you have a 5-star that's backing up Chop Robinson, and which, by the way, here's the tweet of him opting out. If you have a 5-star backing him up, that means that player is not as good as the person that is starting. That's the way a meritocracy works. Chop Robinson is the best option that they have at defensive end. You might have another 5-star that's pretty good, but he's not going to quite be at that level. So it's going to help out Ole Miss's defensive end. And with the potential playing of Jaden Williams and getting Victor Kern, the offensive line should be in a little bit better shape going into the Peach Bowl. Penn State's going to be good. They're going to try and win the line of scrimmage, both offensively and defensively. They lead the nation in tackles for loss, and also they're one of the lowest on offense in giving up tackles for loss. That's because they run the football, and they are really good at the line of scrimmage. But this is a pretty big deal for Ole Miss in this offense moving forward. This is the best matchup at bowl season would have been a full-strength Penn State team versus a full-strength Ole Miss offense. That Ole Miss offense versus Penn State's defense. Now Penn State might be without Chop Robinson and Manny Diaz for the game. It's slowly going over to advantage Ole Miss. Now we have to see after Manny Diaz, if he takes that job, what about the corner? Does he opt out? What other opt-outs do they have on that defense? Because that defense could just become a shell of itself. And if that defense is a shell of itself, it's danger time if Ole Miss comes in with that game plan that they had against Texas A&M and LSU because they're afraid of the talent on the edge. Ole Miss gets into problems offensively whenever they just assume they're better than the team they're playing. That's when the play calling gets predictable. That's whenever everything happens. Whenever this offense gets scared that the defensive line can affect what's going on, that is when Ole Miss changes the tempo of the quarterback getting rid of the ball. That is when the tempo becomes really effective. They start using all 4 quadrants of the field. They start to pick on players that they want to pick on. That like they did Harold Perkins. Like Harold Perkins is potentially the best linebacker in college football. Why would anybody pick on Harold Perkins? Well, that's what Lane Kiffin did in that game. So whenever they can get into their bag a little bit, and they will be, I think in spite of opt-outs and things like that, the talent is going to lead to Ole Miss kind of getting into their bag a little bit. This is going to be a game. Caden Prescorn could show out. Trey Harris could absolutely wake up, although if the first-round corner for Penn State comes back to school. That appears to be the matchup. So in that case, look for Dayton Wade, look for Jordan Watkins and Caden Prescorn to be active participants in the offense. Ole Miss running the ball, it's always going to come down to how effective Quinshon Judkins can be running the football. It will be a slog, but Ole Miss ran the ball a little bit by the end of the year on just about everybody. So we'll see exactly how that goes. Again, Penn State has talent on defense, and they've recruited really well. They have. But if you lose these pieces, the defense is not as good as it once was. Without Manny Diaz, without Chop Robinson, the Penn State defense goes from here to here. And if they get another couple opt-outs, it's going to go down to that about there. And if that happens, Ole Miss has a chance to really cook in this bowl game. So I'm pretty excited about that. So thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Every dayers, we get into that recruiting mindset with the portal and high school recruiting. Next week, we look at how these officials are going. Plus, we'll be talking about a potential visit watch for Walter Nolen. All good stuff. Remember, this weekend, my mother's in town, so the number of videos is probably going to go down a little bit. We're still going to do Ole Miss every day because that's kind of our thing, but it probably won't look like it normally does. We're kind of doing Christmas as well. For your second listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. For those of you on YouTube, we'll send you there right now. Hotty toddy.